A former reality TV star sits in federal custody tonight. His life forever changed by choices that led him down a path darker than any tribal council vote. Brandon Hantz, once known for emotional breakdowns on primetime television, now faces 40 years behind bars for crimes involving fire, violence, and blood on Houston streets. The charges read like something from a crime thriller: federal racketeering, conspiracy, arson. But this isn't fiction. This is the chilling true story of how a troubled survivor contestant became entangled in one of the most violent biker club wars Texas has seen in decades. This is the story of how primetime fame became a prelude to potential life imprisonment. The survivor years, seeds of chaos. Before federal agents ever knew his name, Brandon Hantz was just another face trying to outwit, outplay, and outlast on reality television. But even then, warning signs flickered like distant flames. South Pacific, 2011. Brandon stepped onto those beaches carrying the weight of a family name already synonymous with chaos. His uncle Russell Hantz had terrorized previous seasons with manipulation that left contestants questioning their sanity. The Hantz name meant trouble. From day one, something felt off. While others played strategic games, Brandon seemed to be fighting a war with himself. The cracks showed early: emotional outbursts, erratic behavior. Then came the moment that shocked viewers. Brandon deliberately destroyed his tribe's food supply, dumping rice into the fire in pure, unfiltered destruction. 2 years later, they brought him back for Caramoan. The second time was worse, much worse. His behavior became so threatening that for the first time in Survivor history, producers removed a contestant because they genuinely feared for everyone's safety. The cameras stopped rolling, but the chaos inside Brandon Hantz was just getting started. From reality TV to real danger, the Bandidos enter the picture. While most former Survivor contestants fade into obscurity, Brandon Hantz took a different path. In the years following his television appearances, he found himself drawn to a world where loyalty meant everything and betrayal could cost you your life. The Bandidos Motorcycle Club wasn't just another group of weekend riders. Founded in 1966, they had built a reputation that made law enforcement tense at their name. Their motto: "We are the people your parents warned you about." This wasn't a club you joined for brotherhood and weekend rides. The Bandidos operated like a shadow government in parts of Texas, with strict hierarchies, territorial control, and a code of silence that would make the mafia proud. By 2019, tensions in Houston had reached a boiling point. The Bandidos found themselves locked in bitter territorial dispute with rival club BEAST. This wasn't petty disagreement. This was war, complete with battle lines, strategic targets, and casualties. The violence escalated quickly. Fistfights became ambushes with metal pipes. Verbal threats became drive-by shootings. According to federal investigators, Bandidos leadership had given a chilling directive: attack rival club members on sight. This was the world Brandon Hantz had chosen to enter. The war escalates, fire and blood. Houston, 2019 to 2022. The streets had become a battlefield. Fire became a message. In Porter, Texas, a bar went up in flames one night. To casual observers, it might have looked like an accident. But federal investigators knew better. This was a calculated strike against rival territory, designed to send a message that echoed louder than any gunshot. The arson was one piece of a larger puzzle of violence. Surveillance cameras captured brutal beatings in broad daylight. 2 men died during this period, one gunned down in a parking lot. Another killed outside a bar in what investigators described as coordinated execution. Business owners found themselves caught in the middle. The violence wasn't confined to club members. Innocent people became collateral damage in a conflict with no rules except strength. Federal agents from multiple agencies had been watching this unfold. They knew taking down an organization like the Bandidos required more than arresting individuals. They needed to build a case that would dismantle the entire structure. That meant invoking RICO, the same law used to break mafia families. Brandon Hantz was about to discover that real-world consequences were far more serious than losing $1 million prize. The investigation. Watching from the shadows, federal agents worked in silence. building a case that would take years to complete and forever change organized crime in Texas. The investigation wasn't some quick operation. This was methodical dissection of a criminal organization that had operated with impunity. Agents spent months learning the club's hierarchy, mapping territory, documenting every act of violence. Surveillance footage captured meetings where orders were given. Undercover recordings revealed conversations about planned attacks. Digital evidence painted a picture of an organization functioning like a corporate enterprise. Brandon Hantz's name first appeared not as a primary target, but as someone connected to club activities. Investigators noted his presence at locations, interactions with members, alleged participation in club business. What started as background surveillance revealed someone who had become part of the machine. The nickname in federal documents, either Gundrop or Loco, wasn't assigned randomly. In organizations like the Bandidos, names carry meaning, reflecting personality, skills, or reputation. Brandon had earned recognition that suggested deeper involvement than casual association. By early 2025, federal prosecutors had enough evidence. The case was massive, 22 charges spanning years of criminal activity. 14 men would be named, including Brandon Hantz, whose journey from reality TV villain to federal defendant was about to become public knowledge. The indictment. Justice comes, calling, February 2025. Federal agents moved with military precision, executing arrests across Houston as one of the largest organized crime indictments in Texas history was unsealed. 14 men, 22 charges. Years of violence reduced to legal language that would determine the rest of their lives. Brandon Hantz was arrested without incident, but the charges were anything but routine. Federal prosecutors accused him of conspiracy to commit racketeering and participating in arson, crimes carrying maximum 20 years each, 40 years total in the federal system, where early release is rare. The indictment detailed systematic terror designed to maintain control and eliminate competition. Brandon's alleged role focused on the Porter, Texas arson, the fire that destroyed a bar connected to rival club. He was the only defendant specifically charged with that particular fire. The racketeering conspiracy charge was equally serious. RICO laws target participation in ongoing criminal enterprises. To be charged under RICO, prosecutors must believe you actively participated in furthering criminal activities. When the Department of Justice announced the indictments, they made their position clear. This was about dismantling a violent criminal network that had terrorized communities through coordinated attacks. The contrast was stark. The same man who melted down on national television now faced federal charges that could keep him behind bars for life. The arson, Brandon's alleged crime, Porter, Texas. A quiet community where Friday night football was usually the most exciting event. But one night, flames lit up the darkness, and a local bar became ground zero in a war most residents didn't know was being fought. According to federal prosecutors, the fire wasn't an accident. It was arson, deliberate, calculated, designed to send a message throughout the Houston Motorcycle Club community. The target was reportedly connected to BEAST, the rival club locked in violent territorial dispute with the Bandidos. In club warfare logic, destroying a rival's gathering place demonstrated power, instilled fear, claimed territory. Brandon Hantz stands accused of playing a direct role in this destruction. Federal investigators spent months reconstructing that night. They analyzed burn patterns, interviewed witnesses, collected physical evidence. More importantly, they gathered intelligence about who planned the attack and why that target was chosen. The fact that Brandon is the only defendant charged specifically with this arson suggests prosecutors believe his role was significant and provable. They wouldn't include such a specific charge unless confident they could demonstrate his involvement beyond reasonable doubt. If convicted on arson alone, Brandon faces 20 years. Combined with racketeering conspiracy, he's looking at potential 40-year sentence, essentially life imprisonment for someone in their 30s. The broader war, context of violence. Houston's motorcycle club war wasn't minor disagreement between riding enthusiasts. This was systematic violence that turned parts of the city into a war zone, complete with targeted killings, strategic attacks, and innocent bystanders caught in crossfire. The body count was real. 2 men died during the period covered by federal indictment. both killed in coordinated hits rather than random violence. Federal agents documented dozens of assaults involving weapons from metal pipes to baseball bats. Victims were hospitalized with broken bones, traumatic brain injuries, permanent scars. The attacks weren't random street crime. These were coordinated strikes by multiple attackers against specific targets, often in broad daylight. The message was clear: cross the Bandidos, and you might not live to regret it. Business owners became unwilling participants. Some were pressured to declare loyalty. Others saw establishments become battlegrounds simply because they catered to wrong clientele. Federal agents described the situation as terrorism, the use of violence and intimidation to achieve territorial goals. The Bandidos were fighting for right to operate without interference in what they considered their territory. This was the environment where Brandon Hantz allegedly chose involvement, not as casual observer, but as active participant in activities prosecutors argue were designed to maintain control through fear and violence. Why Brandon? The transformation. Question? The question haunting this story. How does someone go from reality TV contestant to federal defendant in major organized crime case? Brandon's journey into the Bandidos world didn't happen overnight. Federal prosecutors don't include someone in major RICO indictment based on casual association. The fact he was charged alongside long-term high-ranking members suggests involvement investigators considered significant. Court documents reveal Brandon had earned recognition within the organization. The alleged nickname indicates he wasn't just someone who occasionally hung around members. In organizations like the Bandidos, names are earned through actions and loyalty, not time served. The progression from troubled reality contestant to alleged criminal participant represents transformation beyond simple bad decision-making. The emotional instability and aggressive tendencies that made for compelling television apparently evolved into something much more dangerous. Federal investigators noted Brandon's presence at key locations during important events in the club's conflict. They documented interactions with other members and alleged participation in activities beyond social rioting. The specific nature of his charges, particularly the arson allegation, suggests prosecutors believe they can prove direct involvement in one of the most serious acts in the entire case. Arson requires planning, preparation, follow-through. What remains unclear is whether Brandon was driven by personal demons, financial desperation, desire for belonging, or something else. His silence since the indictment means the public may never understand his motivations until he speaks in court, if he ever does. The federal response: justice strikes back. When federal prosecutors moved against the Bandidos organization, they did so with the full weight of the U.S. justice system. The press conference announcing the indictments was carefully orchestrated display of law enforcement unity. Representatives from FBI, ATF, DEA, Texas Department of Public Safety, and multiple local police departments announced what they called one of the most significant organized crime takedowns in recent Texas history. U.S. attorneys made their message clear. This wasn't about targeting motorcycle enthusiasts. This was about dismantling a violent criminal network that had operated with impunity. The investigation had been massive in scope, involving hundreds of hours of surveillance, dozens of agents, coordination between multiple agencies. Federal officials emphasized they had built their case methodically, ensuring every charge was backed by solid evidence. The use of RICO laws sent unmistakable signal about how seriously federal authorities took this case. RICO charges require prosecutors to prove crimes were part of pattern of criminal activity carried out by ongoing organization. For defendants, including Brandon, the federal venue means facing a justice system that operates very differently from state courts. Federal sentences are typically longer, early release more difficult, prosecutor resources virtually unlimited. The announcement sent shockwaves through motorcycle club communities throughout Texas and beyond. Organizations that had operated for decades with minimal federal interference suddenly faced possibility that their entire way of life could be dismantled through RICO prosecutions. Department of Emergency Administration, Texas Department of Public Safety, and multiple local police departments stood together to announce what they called one of the most significant organized crime takedowns in recent Texas history. U.S. attorneys made their message crystal clear. This wasn't about targeting motorcycle enthusiasts or people who simply rode bikes together on weekends. This was about dismantling what they described as a violent criminal network that had operated with impunity for too long. The investigation had been massive in scope, involving hundreds of hours of surveillance, dozens of agents, and coordination between multiple agencies that don't always work well together. Federal officials emphasized that they had built their case methodically, ensuring that every charge was backed by solid evidence that would hold up in court. The use of RICO laws sent an unmistakable signal about how seriously federal authorities took this case. RICO charges aren't filed lightly. They require prosecutors to prove not just that individual crimes occurred, but that those crimes were part of a pattern of criminal activity carried out by an ongoing organization. For the defendants, including Brandon Hantz, the federal venue means facing a justice system that operates very differently from state courts. Federal sentences are typically longer, early release is more difficult to obtain, and the resources available to prosecutors are virtually unlimited. Federal officials also made it clear that this case represented just one phase of a larger effort to reclaim communities that had been living under the threat of club violence. They warned other organizations that similar investigations were ongoing and that anyone involved in systematic violence could expect the same treatment. The announcement sent shockwaves through motorcycle club communities throughout Texas and beyond. Organizations that had operated for decades with minimal federal interference suddenly found themselves facing the possibility that their entire way of life could be dismantled through RICO prosecutions. For Brandon Hantz, the federal charges represent a catastrophic escalation from his previous brushes with public scrutiny. Reality show controversies might damage your reputation and cost you social media followers. Federal racketeering charges can cost you the rest of your life. Current status: awaiting justice. As this story is being told, Brandon Hantz sits in federal custody, his fate hanging in the balance of a justice system that doesn't offer the second chances that made for good television. Federal court proceedings move at their own pace, governed by rules that prioritize thoroughness over speed. Pre-trial motions, evidence discovery, and plea negotiations can take months before a case reaches trial, if it ever does. The charges against Brandon carry serious mandatory minimum sentences that limit judicial discretion, even if he were to cooperate with authorities. Federal racketeering charges don't offer many paths to reduced sentences, and the arson charge adds another layer of complexity. Legal experts familiar with RICO cases emphasize that federal prosecutors typically don't bring such charges unless confident in their evidence. The multi-year investigation, extensive surveillance, and cooperation from confidential witnesses suggest the government believes it has built a solid case. For someone like Brandon, who gained notoriety for emotional volatility under pressure, the federal court environment represents a completely different challenge. There are no immunity idols, no tribal councils, no opportunities for dramatic confessionals. The reality of federal prosecution is that cases are won and lost based on evidence, not personality or compelling narratives. If convicted on all charges, Brandon faces potential 40-year sentence that would effectively end his life as a free man. The larger picture. When reality becomes real. Brandon Hantz's story represents more than one man's fall from reality TV controversy to federal criminal charges. It's stark illustration of how quickly life can spiral beyond redemption when someone chooses to associate with organizations operating outside the law. The contrast between his survivor appearances and current situation is almost impossible to comprehend. The same emotional volatility that made for compelling television apparently evolved into alleged participation in serious federal crimes with real victims and permanent consequences. Federal agents spent years building their case, and Brandon's inclusion suggests his involvement reached levels investigators considered significant. This wasn't someone in the wrong place at wrong time. Prosecutors believe he actively participated in activities furthering the organization's criminal goals. For motorcycle clubs throughout Texas and beyond, Brandon's case sends clear message. Federal authorities are watching, documenting, building cases that can result in decades-long prison sentences for anyone involved in systematic violence. The human cost of the club war extends far beyond immediate participants. Families lost loved ones. Communities lived in fear. Business owners saw livelihoods threatened. The ripple effects of organized violence touch innocent people in ways participants rarely consider. Brandon's story also raises uncomfortable questions about mental health, personal responsibility, and systems that might have prevented his alleged transformation. The warning signs were visible years ago, but interventions that might have changed his trajectory never materialized. Epilogue: The Price of Choices. The cameras stopped rolling on Brandon Hantz's survivor story more than a decade ago, but the real drama of his life was just beginning. Tonight, he sits in federal custody, facing charges that could keep him imprisoned until he's an old man. The same emotional volatility that once entertained millions has allegedly evolved into participation in crimes that terrorized communities and destroyed lives. Federal prosecutors believe they can prove Brandon transformed from reality TV villain into something much more dangerous, an active participant in what they describe as a criminal organization, using systematic violence to maintain territorial control. The evidence was gathered over years of patient investigation by federal agents who documented every meeting, every conversation, every alleged act of violence with the precision of historians recording events for posterity. If convicted, Brandon faces potential 40-year sentence that would essentially end his life as a free man. The federal system offers few second chances and fewer opportunities for redemption through expressed remorse. His story serves as chilling reminder that reality television controversies pale in comparison to real-world consequences. Federal prosecutors argue that participating in arson and racketeering can cost you everything. For Brandon Hantz, the transformation is complete. The troubled reality show contestant who once melted down over game strategy now awaits trial on charges that could determine whether he ever tastes freedom again. The final tribal council is over. The votes have been cast. And this time, there's no million-dollar prize waiting at the end, only the possibility of spending the rest of his life paying for choices that can never be undone.